Thank you, everybody. I wanted to thank the entire art department and the students that I've met throughout the day. It's been great doing workshops with all of you, and to name special thanks for Carlos Limas, Chair of the Department, Alexis, Luis, and Genesis, and the help that they've put together in putting together the show. And so the work that's on the walls goes back 10, 15 years. And I thought it'd be good to open up a conversation that the questions that you have, I want to hear those, and I want to offer a good amount of Q&A as I go through the slides. So think of questions. If you don't have any already, I do want to encourage, even if it's one-on-one talk that we get to later. So in my day job, I'm at Midwestern State University. It's roughly 10 hours north from here, along the Oklahoma border, in between Dallas and Oklahoma is where I'm at. I teach painting and drawing, and I've been doing that since 2017. But I'll talk about my training, because where I was years ago at your point in life, it was really important that I thought about what did I want to gain from school? You know, what did I want to learn so then I could become the type of artist that I admired. And I thought I'd open this up with a quote, a question, and the writer Brad Metzer is speaking about another writer named Brian K. Vaughan, and he writes this in a preface for a book that Brian K. Vaughan wrote. And he says, Brian K. Vaughan is a master class magician, and what he does is he compares that to the standard magician. So he says the standard strives for the ta-da moment, surprise moment, and then it's over. So pulling the rabbit out of the hat, the coin behind the ear, you know, there's kind of like that, oh yeah, it's magic, great. But it doesn't really carry further. He uses that standard magician to contrast against the best magicians that reveal the trick. It's called a pledge. They tell the audience what will happen before it happens. They challenge the audience to find the trick, how it's performed, and if they're able to see the turn, which is that moment where you can't quite understand, even if you know what is being told is going to happen. So in reading that, I found that there's a great analogy to what we do as artists, is that what you see is an illusion. It is not real. The best magician will get up on stage and tell you that it's not a trick. They'll tell you what will happen. And in the same way, what you currently see is a painting, sculpture, photo, digital design. It's really important for me that there's an honesty with the work that I make, that I want these to be seen as paintings. I'm not just simply interested in that sort of like, oh, it looks like it's real, looks like I can grab it. I want to empower you as an audience to think about why we do that in our daily lives, why we look at our phones and we believe things that are not real, why we read things in the news and we start to wonder, like, well, what is this happening? And so I think we have an ability to study images and make decisions for ourselves about what our truths will be as we start to decipher and decodify those images that are given to us. And artwork does that, right? Because you're looking at a surface and you believe that it's something, but at the end of the day, it's just paint. It's just a surface. And so what I really like about artists that I grew up looking at is that I think that honesty is held inside their work. I admired that it was both a surface, but it also had that illusion where I felt like I could go into that window, into that image. And so very, very, very early on, I was highly intrigued by that idea of the magic of art, right? Like you can look at something and it wasn't paint, it became something more in my mind that was visceral, that was real. So a lot of my early training and early endeavors was just learning how to paint, learning how to draw. And so I just wanted to get technique. You know, that was one of the first goals for me as a freshman, sophomore student in university. And the question came up about who is that guy and how do we get him in the artwork? And so going back to the 80s, I thought of like, what life have I lived can start to move and seep into those images that I'm making. Because if we look back, this could be made from a Baroque artist, right? Or someone that is living in the 17th century. There's like techniques there, but it's not about what my concerns were growing up. So I thought of like looking back at my life and these early things that got me into art and toys and comics and those really fun things that we all love and playful things that we got into art. And I started doing these paintings that were modeled after just things I had, because I thought of like, why do I still have that stuff? And why does it matter? So I started to build them as stories, and then they started to slowly turn into mythologies. You know, think of how like religion is formed and how mythologies are formed, or character designs in concept art, and how archetypes run through and they seep through time. Thousands of years, we still read about, you know, Greek history, and they change names and they turn into Superman. And so, you know, those ideas carry on. You know, it's like, why do we do that? And so this mythology, I started to look at world history, US history, and I was doing printmaking and paintings and drawings. And this is a large etching that I wanted it to feel like is both a toy, but also wanted to feel like as terrible as possible. Like, what does war look like? And so this G.I. Joe, in really like a weird way, I wanted to feel something for this character. And so I built that piece, and I started to do paintings that I was using references in mythologies, right? Like Judgment of Paris, or Judith and Holofernes. And there's little kind of like jokes in there, like the role reversals, what the male-female characters are doing. But the fact that they're toys like allowed me to both be serious with my technique, but also have kind of like a fun nature with what I was making. And these were larger paintings than I'm doing now. These are like 5 foot, 6 foot paintings. So I really liked taking the toys that were like that big and making them that big in the painting surface. And I was modeling a lot of my technique off of Titian, Rembrandt, Artemisia Gentileschi. Altarpieces. This is my Star Wars altarpiece. So this actually has doors and opens and closes. So it was a legit shrine. And then I got strange with them. I stopped making stories, and I wanted them to just be like these balls or landscapes, figurines. And so I did that for a while. This is getting towards the end of my senior year, going into grad school. And I wanted to sort of rattle the cages, you know, like every once in a while you have to say, like, I'm going to reinvent. And I felt like I had an understanding of what the toys were doing, but I wanted to challenge myself by looking at screens and computer screens and TV screens and glitches, and some great artists, Dan Hayes, Casey Zviglia. I'll have to explain this one. Is the image on the right is how it looks from the front, but this is how it looks from the back, right? And this is a embroidery piece that Casey Zviglia made, and I loved where she went next with her work. And so she started to bring them away from the wall, and then she started to do paintings of what the backs look like, right? So this is kind of like a generational idea of, you know, if you do a copy of a copy of a copy and it's no longer looking like the original, but computers can do that and they can get really glitchy. I looked at Thomas Friedman and Do Ho Suh as artists that really challenged me because of what they do with sculpture. So I thought of like, how can I do that with painting? And so I went with the more immediate responses. Can I make the painting feel like a computer screen or an old VHS that's paused? And so I did a number of these portraits that were challenging the stillness of the screen, like how light happens, right? So it's kind of dated now, but that glitch that happens on VHS, you have to ask people who have a VHS player. So this is a fun turning point because I use appropriation in my work. Appropriation is when an image exists and an artist pulls it from its original space and then it's reused in a new context, right? And we do this every day. We copy and paste, and we use it for nefarious purposes, for copy and paste. Like if you've, because you haven't done it, but you know a friend who's done it where they had a plagiarized paper, right? And so you have to think of like what it means when we pull something from its original, and what does it do when it's next to something else. So I became really interested in the vast sort of landscape of all of those images out there. So the image on the left was an experiment that I gave myself that I said, what if I Google Kevin Bacon? And I'll start with Kevin Bacon because it's 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon, and somehow he has connections with everybody. And so I'm going to look at him, and I'm going to scroll down through Google and see what kind of other images come up. And then I'm going to use that image and then type in that word, and I'm going to type. And so I went like 20 generations away from Kevin Bacon, but I ended up doing like 3 to 6 ink washes a day with that experiment, trying to keep up with the amount of images that were coming up. And I did these really small paintings. So these are like 2-inch by 2-inch paintings. They're honestly like, you can't drink caffeine when you paint those because they're just so tight. So I learned how to paint small, and I got really interested in like numerical, kind of just multitude of images. This is a series that I started doing as I was leaving school and going to kind of find the next thing, but I was very inspired by 1980s video games and flat spaces and games that have a sense of play or function to them. So you probably recognize what these screens are like with Space Invaders or Donkey Kong and games like that. But I used images pulled from art history at the same time. And so the idea of the arcade was really, really important for my work because we touch the joystick, the controller, and then the thing happens on the screen. And I say that now, it's like, of course that happens because many of you grew up with phones already in your hands, and you know that that's how it works. But I was like 7 or 8 years old before I saw my first arcade machine to where I really got to touch it, and a laundromat where you had to put the quarters inside and the whole thing. And so for me, it's like that was the magic that I referenced earlier. You know, like the fact that I'm touching this and the screen is doing what it should in real time. And so I thought of like, how can I harness that feeling about video games, but it was about touch. And that was the real turning point because it was already there in art history. And so there's a story about this 2 artists, Zeuxias and Parrhasius. They hold a competition, and they want to judge who is the better of the 2 painters, right? So they go away, they go to their studios. One painter comes out, he's got paintings of grapes. And then the birds come out of the sky, and then they start pecking away at the painting, right? And then the other painter is showing his, and he says, oh, I really like your grape painting. Can you do me the honor in taking the cloth off of mine? It's wrapped up in cloth. I'd like you to unveil it for the rest of the court. And so he reaches just to find out that it's not cloth at all. It's a painting of cloth, and therefore the second painter had fooled the first, and he was better not just fooling nature and animals, but also mankind. So there's kind of like a clever, kind of twist to the story. But as I started to think more and more about that painting and trompe l'oeil and fooling the eye, I thought of like, can I bring the painting to a level that it no longer feels like paint until you get close and it invites the viewer in? And I wanted to kind of think about that, sort of like, when does the lie break down? And I talked earlier about images that we trust, images that we see, we take for granted. And eventually, if we get close enough, we can discover truth. Any image, I think at the end, we want to discover what is that truth that we're looking at. Is it a real person, or is it a series of dots or pixels that make up that person, right? And so I started to, a funny story is when I made this piece, the first person who saw it says, oh, wow, you're doing assemblage now. I said, nope. Keep walking, get closer. And so I got interested in like what happens if this is a painting with these objects starting to come off of it. A couple of you asked earlier about like influences at the same time period. So obviously like video games, comics, movies. Stan Winston has this quote, know that these artists are the Renaissance artists of the 21st century. In the days of Michelangelo, the artists worked for the churches. In today's world, they work for our industry. He's talking about special effects in movies. He's talking about people that work in movies like this where they make it really dirty to become more real. And so all that dust and grime and liquid stuff, that's why we believe it. It's not because of the creature, but it's because of everything around the creature, right? And it's lived in, it has history. And so I became interested in decay and adding these kind of cracks. And if you look at a lot of the paintings, there's going to be very, very flat areas. But then I have like this kind of like beat up portion that feels like it's been dragged or mailed incorrectly or something to that nature. And it feels, for me, that it's like it makes that more real as we look at the objects that have decay. And it's like, because they take on that history around the edges, the dirt and the grime. And so for me, I became very interested in mixing paint that when I mix paint, I don't think of it as a dark color. I think of that as a puddle of shadow. You know what I mean? And I think of that as a puddle of grease or a puddle of dirt or decay, and I'll add paint on and wipe it away and find out the best solution. So I'll talk about the concepts that I'm on now, and I'm very interested in predictions that happened years ago in the 1950s, post-World War II, and what they thought today would look like. You know, they had this idea that we'd either be living in a nuclear, like it could still happen, but so this like nuclear blast, and what would life be like? And so I did a number of paintings that are inspired by reactions to that, and so you'll see references about the worst case scenario, you know, that the world blew up. And coupled with that is I grew up in an earth home, and so my dad, in his way, he owned a shooting range. I worked in the shooting range. I made bullets when I was 12 years old, and I lived in the ground. It's like I had a fallout shelter, and I didn't realize that I had a fallout shelter until later, that I was being protected from the world with my dad's prepper mentality. So I did these paintings that were about that worst case scenario and bombs dropping and things that happened in real life, like actual bombs did drop and they didn't go off in South Carolina. And duck and cover, hiding under desk, and little drills that I had to do before the Cold War ended. But then the other side of it is very hopeful, you know, that we are like the Jetsons. We're going to live in the future. We're going to be on the moon, and somehow that's going to be our reality. And so the paintings take a fork in the road. And, you know, as you walk around, you might find some that definitely lean more towards the Holocaust or the destruction. And then there's the other side of it where it's about living in this society where we have everything that is given to us because we're in a utopia, right? And so the arcology was this plan. Has anybody heard the term arcology? It was a plan in like the 1970s that we would have like this city that could hold 100,000 people, and different levels of the buildings would be for agriculture or work or education. And we never got that big building. It didn't happen. We got Amazon instead. And so you can have all that sent to your house, education and food, and you can work from home. And so I thought of that interesting reversal that happened, that we didn't gain the big building where we can all live together. We live together because I can text my wife when I'm far away, and I can do some emails when I'm far away, but it's all because of the internet. So I thought of this weird keyboard squid monster thing that's reaching out, all tentacles, and it's the version of what we got, right? So, but I'm super interested in these predictions in the 1960s, 1970s, in particular about what they saw for the year 2000. And a lot of the paintings are the pondering of that idea. But it's not ended, because the fear that we have for nuclear holocaust has then turned into the fear for a school shooting, right? Or going to a church or supermarket. And so there's a version of it that does exist. And the idea of like class preparing for the gas mask, it's like that didn't really happen, but it also did. I paint things that are mundane in my pockets. I look at things that are small. I'm interested in contemporary political dialogue, that something could be redacted or covered or put underneath, the carpet. I think it's hard to ignore current politics in the way they cross over with mythology, and how someone comes up, becomes very powerful, but eventually that, like Icarus, is eventually will come down, and whether it's now or later, but it's not forever. And I think that's the point. So I'm very interested in art history because those stories go on, and I'm interested in art history as a way to act as an access point to these characters. allow us to understand the stories that we are in today, whether those characters are Superman or looking at Caravaggio. But I'm just showing a couple images of my techniques. So to veer into that discussion is like how these are made. I use brush. I use old technology from the Renaissance, paints that haven't changed for a number of years. But I couple that with drawing on a computer to design stencils, and that's the workshop I gave earlier today. So I'm able to create these really clean avenues in the paintings that are designed by like vinyl cutting or drafting tools or things like that. But at the end of the day, it's all oil. And I think that's really important for my work is that I'm not creating a graphic design piece. I wanted to borrow from the aesthetic, but I want the stress or the struggle or the challenge or the play that happens when I do that with paint. I like the figuring out as I go. The same reason I like watching live music or live performance rather than watching something that's like AI holograms of the same thing. So I want to get that realness. I want to find that tightrope, you know what I mean? Like when things don't work and you can kind of find a way to make them work. But I'll show this piece for a couple of the in-process works. I work very small, I work very tight. I'll use a headset to see better, drafting tools. These are on panels. And so just kind of like supplement things that help me in the studio, or it'd be apps, doing drawings, doing collages. I do computer collages, but I also do like real collages because I want to find out, okay, here's my mindset is that if I have to find the right solution, I have to see all the 999 bad solutions as well, right? So then I know this is right because I see what all the awfulness can look like if I figure it out. So I'll do a lot of these drawings on my collages and scans and Xerox, and then I'll make things on the computer and I'll feed them into Procreate and Photoshop. And then vinyl cutting. And this is a good example of where that vinyl cutting is best illustrated, is I will cut out the stencils, paint into them, and then continue manipulating the light and shadows to create the piece. But I just want to end with a few that are more current in the work. And I'm very interested in not just American history, but global history and how we are seen from outside. And the impact that we've had in different parts of the world in relation to our actions. And then I'm very interested in making these feel fun and playful, but also there's a layer of depth of like, why do they exist? And so the interest in the imagery itself. Jeff Bezos can go to the moon, but we cannot. I like doing mundane objects, and out here in the small gallery are examples of those daily artifacts. Things I touch, things I hold in my pocket, like keys, Post-it notes, I voted stickers. They hold meaning, but we don't really look at them until we do a painting of them or do an object of them. And so I think I'll hold here, and I want to open that up for questions, but I think at the end of the day, I'm hoping to find meaning through play in the studio and figuring things out. And as an educator, I don't always know what I'm doing. And I use my art to figure out where I'm kind of focused in with these ideas. So I like sometimes starting pieces without knowing where they're going to go. And sometimes I have a clear plan and a full sketch, but other times I just throw a color on there and just say, let's get started. And 2 weeks from now, I'm going to start to figure out what the next thing will be. So in short, they will take 3 months, 6 months. I've had pieces sit alone for maybe like a year before I fully see it through. But it beckons you, you know, once you start a piece, it's like you got to keep returning back to it. So that's what I like about painting, is that it forces me to keep paying attention to it and get better somehow. So I want to thank you all, and I want to also open that up for questions. Thank you. Yeah.
the 20th century artists now that we look at, you know, who did the posters for like classic movies, and we don't see some of that anymore, right? We've kind of lost that art a bit. Now, like, talk about with AI coming in, and I remember having a conversation, I think it was with Ed, because he talked about how printmaking used to be like a low-class art, like it wasn't in museums, you know what I mean? Because people saw it as just easily replicatable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until it wasn't, until like graphic design came in. Now printmaking got put into museums, it was high-class art.
Right.
I guess kind of just like the cycle of that, and now with AI coming in, we now appreciate this so much more. How do you feel like, do you think about that like in the future, like how maybe in 20, 30, 100 years, how your art will be like seen?
Oh yeah. Or
Yeah, like,
or will be seen. It's like
like,
fingers
you have to do this in
crossed.
person now more.
Yeah.
You appreciate it more in person than ever before.
Right. So I guess I can answer that by what I look for when I go to museums. First of all, it's like go to museums because there's like people living there. It's like your art ancestors, right? And you could learn a lot from them. So I get there and I look at a piece and I start to wonder like, what was that like when that person was standing there? And what kind of moves and what kind of things did they think about? And when did they struggle? I recently saw a show by Jenny Saville of these large portrait pieces. And, you know, in between the cracks of the virtuoso, you know, you find that there's like a real person there who's got to stop and do the dishes and take care of the kids or go get gas and groceries. And it's like you got to return and you can find out like there's a real life behind that work, right? And so I really enjoy standing and on a technical level figuring out and excavating those layers of thought of what do they put down, what do they think about, what are the choices, but also where are they performing in the work, because painting is a verb, right? So you have the object is a painting, but also you're acting on the piece. And so for me to respond back to the AI question is like, I'm interested in the person and I'm also interested in the performance and where they're finding that human quality that is fallible, but also overcoming the questions or struggles. And so I like that we are all human and we, in our own works, nothing will be perfect, you know, and I kind of like that space where those imperfections can shine through. Yeah, thank you. Other questions at all?
So like what inspired you to use like the stencils and stuff like that in your artwork?
Yeah, so I was doing, this is an older piece and I wasn't doing it here, I wasn't doing it here. I was already doing that like clean mechanical plastic way of painting. I was looking at artists that, like some pop artists and post-pop artists that were doing that and creating, like hiding the brushstroke, right? And so I thought about what that looks like when I disappear in the work and there's places when my hand starts to appear. So that was the conversation was, can I create a piece where it doesn't have to feel like my handling, but it feels like it's made on a computer, but I'm the one operating that, you know, and that's where it started. And eventually I started to use Photoshop or use Procreate and then use stenciling as a way to guide it. But it's really important for me that it doesn't announce itself, you know, like I want this to be like a unified space where even though that feels like something that feels mechanical, I don't want to feel like a machine did that. I want my hand to still rest inside of that in the microscopic world. So to go back to where's that interest come from? The trompe l'oeil sort of guided that. So to make these things feel more real, putting something behind it that was really flat and plastic or mechanical was the sort of the foil to that conversation. You know what I mean? Like when you see string over there and the wires, where would that happen? And maybe it's on a plastic object or computer screen that really separates from that surface. Yeah. Other questions?
Actually, I had like to go
Oh, yeah.
to that. How did you get like, so your artwork looks like very like a print. Like,
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have no brushstrokes or nothing.
Right.
I'm trying to like, I want to dabble in that, so how would I do that?
Yeah. Painting's really hard. Did you know? I didn't know how to do it for a long time. So A really good question. The surface that I'm getting, I showed briefly on the screen. I'll use razor blades. I'll use scrubby pads. I'll use the scrubby pads that you use to do your dishes. And so if you want your dishes like no spots at all, you're just going to scrub them and scrub them. So that's what I do to my work, is that I'll use those, what are they called, those green Scotch pads? Is that right? So the Scotch-Brite. And so I'll do like printmaking rollers. And so I'll use brayers to do that. And I'm going to get rid of paint strokes by doing printmaking rolling this way. This is a split fountain roll, right? Like you have one color here and you got another color here. And I'm using 2 brayers and I'm just doing this. And so automatically I don't have a brush involved. And then when the paint dries, I use razor blades and I scrape off any marks that are there. And then I go over it, and I'm not using sandpaper, but I'm using dishwashing scrubs and things that are really, really soft. And then I do that about 50 more times. So it's not like I can get the smooth surface by doing it once. I work in layers, and that's kind of paying homage to those artists that I looked at very early on that drove me. Is like I look into the painting because there is multiple layers that is being performed on the piece. But it is reductive, and I did pull a lot of that influence from my background as a painter / printmaker. Yeah. Good. Yes.
Can you share a little bit about like how you balance teaching art but also being an artist? Like.
Yeah. So my teaching schedule is I teach multiple levels: painting, drawing, full load. I'm also the gallery director at Midwestern, so it's tough to get it in, right? And so. Luckily, my wife is a painter, and she's an artist, so I'm in a sort of a sphere of we understand each other, and so she's working, I'm working, we've got cats running around us doing that, and so, but then weekends and summers, but it is tough because when you start to count the hours, well, what is lost is like you're not going to go on trips, you're not going to do a social life, and when I do trips, it's something like this. But it's the fact that there's work, and then what would be social life is social / studio time, and I try to keep a transparency about my working methods that I also work at school. So in that way, if I'm there and a student has a question, I could say, yeah, I'll get with you in 10 minutes, but it could be like my office hours. I'm trying to get like just another hour in, and just doing it. And but what does help me as an artist is starting 3 pieces and saying at some point they're going to get touched, and if I don't start them, it's just ideas floating around here that are like, they don't matter. Yeah. In the back, yeah. Oh.
Like you said, you were inspired from other artists yourself. If somebody from our generation was inspired by you and was going to do art based off the times of the current scarce, because there's a lot of things going up as of recently, how do you think it would look with all the stuff that we have modern and all of the ideas that we have now? Like we had a preset idea of, what the future could have looked like. Not preset, but a very romanticized one as that you can think yourself. I wonder how it would look if somebody took inspiration from you and tried to do it based on the modern scares of the things that are currently going up.
Like, what would be an example? Like AI was mentioned, but what else are you thinking of? Like,
Current fear that another war is brewing.
yeah.
A lot of the stuff that's currently going on, rather border wars and whatnot, deportations, things like that. A lot of people are getting scared again, and I wonder how people would depict that if somebody took inspiration from you.
Yeah, I think it's important that you're just talking about it. First of all, it's like you're understanding what's outside your door, and what does it mean to make work about that? I think to reframe it, it's not necessarily modeling after what I'm doing, but if you were to make your own work, it's like, well, what matters to you? And you just said it. It's like you're afraid of this, or what would that look like in the future? And there's an honesty involved in that. I had to explain my answer to your question. I had a student struggle with that idea a lot. They said, how do I make work that matters now? Because you have all that museum and you have all that history. And I said, just write down everything you did today. Like, you woke up and you checked your email and you did all this, and then all of a sudden it ended up being this like really long list, right, of like what your day looked like. And she says, oh, actually, there's a lot of stuff I can choose from. And I said, yeah, and that was just one day. You know, now do it 365 times, and then do it for how many years you lived, and then think about outside of yourself. And so we got into the conversation that maybe it's not about making work that was about her identity, but about herself as a lens to the world. And so the way that you're talking is that you're sort of like a signal, receiving ideas, and you're being concerned about war. You're not in war, but you're concerned of someone who could be in it, and somebody on another side of the world, you know what I mean? So that's how we act as artists, is that we can be lenses to those concerns. It's not necessarily about us, but we have an ability to speak for those that can't be spoken for. Thank you. The others.
Any last questions? We good? There you go. Sorry.
Oh yeah, in the back.
Right. What was, I'm not sure, but was there like any specific art piece for you when you began stenciling that you thought, yes, this is my niche, I want to keep doing this, I like this style that I'm doing?
Yeah, I showed a couple of them as I was going along, and you know, you're not going to like everything you make. I have a lot of clunkers that are bad. It's like, God, I thought I would do better at that painting. But I think it's like when it lands, it's the one that started to make sense for me is the one I showed that had like the blue background with like the orange wires. Because on that piece, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't know if this is going to work or how I would do this. And so I kind of worked with it and struggled with it, and I was like, okay, now that I figured that out, what's the next best thing? So if you ask me what my favorite piece is now, it's going to change as I go forward. And it's not necessarily like, you know, you feel nostalgic about certain pieces from the past, but what I think I look at now as those next plateaus are the ones I didn't quite know what I'm doing, and then somehow they're getting reconciled with the newer pieces. And so in my own way, I think of, I don't want to repeat myself. I think that's the best way I can say that, is like when I make things, I want to take interest that that's already there, but also I want to like find something from the outside that I can monkey wrench the situation and say, how do I do this? Because I got to figure it out. I want to be a student. I want to be a student for life, right? And part of that is just, I don't want to create the same over and over again. So each piece will have its own challenges, and that's my approach. Yeah. Any other questions?
All right.
Good.
Thank you so much, guys, for hanging out. We've got plenty of snacks for you. Please take them home. All right, and again, enjoy the show. Thank you again, Jason, for everything.
Yeah, thank you. All right.